What's the most disrespectful thing someone did at your parents' funeral? My dad died last March after battling cancer for 2 years. The whole thing was brutal watching him slowly waste away. My mom became a shell of herself during those final months. We all pulled together as a family except for my brother Chet. He had been the black sheep for years before dad got sick. Chet had stolen money from dad and dropped out of college 3 times. He refused to get a job or take any responsibility for his life. Dad finally cut him off financially last year after Chet stole $30,000. He took the money straight from their retirement account without asking anyone. When dad passed away, Chet showed up at the funeral home acting devastated. He even volunteered to handle the gravestone paperwork to help mom out. We were all shocked but thought maybe losing dad had changed him. Mom was barely functioning, so we let Chet handle the monument arrangements. We had already picked out the inscription together as a family. It would say, "Beloved father and husband, forever in our hearts." The words were simple and classic, exactly what dad would have wanted. The funeral came and went without any major incidents. Chet gave a speech about redemption and family that made everyone cry. For 3 weeks after the funeral, we thought he'd finally grown up. Mom even started talking about reconciling with him. She kept saying dad would have wanted the family to stay together. Then the day of the gravestone unveiling arrived 3 weeks later. Mom had been counting down to this moment since the funeral ended. She desperately needed that closure and permanent place to visit dad. My other brother Simon drove her to the cemetery that morning. I met them there with fresh flowers for the grave. Chet said he'd meet us there, but texted that he was running late. The cemetery worker led us to dad's lot in the memorial garden section. A black cloth covered the new granite stone that had just been installed. Mom was already crying while clutching the roses she'd brought for dad. Simon had his arm around her shoulders for support. I stood on her other side as the worker pulled away the covering. I heard Mom scream before my brain processed what I was seeing. Carved in massive letters across the beautiful gray granite were 3 words. The stone read, "D's Nuts 420," in deep permanent engravings. Mom collapsed to her knees and began sobbing uncontrollably. Simon stood there with his mouth hanging open in complete shock. He kept looking between the stone and me like we were hallucinating. Other visitors in the cemetery stopped to stare at the commotion. I kept repeating that this had to be the wrong grave somehow, but it wasn't a mistake at all. There was dad's full name with his birth and death dates. Below them were those 3 horrible words that would haunt us forever. Simon immediately called the monument company while I helped Mom back to the car. She kept looking back at the stone and wailing in grief. 20 minutes later, Chet finally showed up at the cemetery. He acted completely shocked by what had happened. The monument company confirmed they had a change order on file. It was signed by Chet and dated 2 days after dad died. Chet swore someone must have forged his signature on the documents. He put on a dramatic performance about being set up by someone. He claimed we were always blaming him for everything that went wrong, but he wasn't fooling anyone. The worst part was learning what it would take to fix this. The monument company said replacing the stone would cost $25,000. We would have to exhume dad's casket and renovate the entire plot. Mom only had her Social Security income to live on. Simon and I were both struggling with our own mortgages and bills. Chet refused to pay a single cent toward fixing his cruel prank. Mom started visiting the cemetery daily with a blanket to cover the stone. She would carefully drape an old quilt over those awful words. Then she would sit with dad and try to pretend everything was normal. Other visitors would ask her about the covered stone. She would have to explain the situation while crying through the whole story. We consulted several lawyers about our options for getting justice. They all said the same thing about our lack of legal recourse. The monument company had Chet's signature, and he'd used dad's credit card. Chet had technically been authorized to handle the gravestone arrangements for the family. Mom stopped eating properly and couldn't sleep through the night anymore. The stone still reads, "D's Nuts 420," at our father's final resting place. Chet got exactly what he wanted with his sick revenge plot. He proved that some people choose cruelty over family, even in death.